In the quiet annals of art history, some pieces stand out not for their groundbreaking technique or revolutionary subject matter, but for a subtle, almost imperceptible anomaly that defies all logical explanation. One such enigma is the Portrait of a Young Woman, an oil painting from 1896, whose artist remains shrouded in mystery, known only for this singular, perplexing work. At first glance, it is a masterpiece of conventional beauty, a seemingly ordinary depiction of a woman named Eleanor Vance, captured in the prime of her youth. Eleanor, the subject of this remarkable portrait, is depicted seated, her posture elegant yet relaxed, her gaze serene and directed slightly away from the viewer, hinting at a contemplative nature. Her attire, a tasteful, high-necked gown in a muted emerald hue, speaks to the fashion sensibilities of the late 19th century, neither ostentatious nor overly plain. The background is equally unassuming. A simple, well-appointed room, perhaps a parlor, with soft, natural light filtering in from an unseen window. A faint suggestion of a garden or a distant landscape can be glimpsed through what appears to be a sheer curtain, adding a touch of depth without distracting from Eleanor herself. Every brushstroke contributes to an overall impression of calm, domesticity, and understated charm. It is, by all accounts, a beautiful and unremarkable portrait, a testament to the skill of an unknown artisan capturing a moment in time. For decades, the painting hung in private collections, admired for its aesthetic qualities and its exquisite portrayal of Eleanor Vance. Art connoisseurs and casual observers alike found nothing particularly noteworthy beyond its inherent beauty. It was simply a lovely piece of period art, one of thousands produced during that prolific era. Yet over time, a peculiar observation began to surface, first whispered among those who spent prolonged periods with the artwork, then discussed with increasing curiosity by art historians and restorers. It started as a faint smudge, a peculiar discoloration in the lower left corner of the canvas, near where Eleanor's skirt met the floor. It was so subtle, so easily dismissed, that many initially attributed it to age, grime, or perhaps a minor imperfection in the paint or canvas itself. However, as cleaning and restoration efforts progressed, this smudge refused to yield. It wasn't surface dirt, nor was it a flaw in the paint layer. Instead, it began to take on a more defined, albeit amorphous, shape. It looked less like a blemish and more like a shadow. But this was where the true peculiarity began to emerge. The light source within the painting was clear. It emanated from the window, casting gentle highlights on Eleanor's face and dress, and creating soft, predictable shadows beneath her chin and in the folds of her gown. The shadow in the corner, however, seemed to defy this internal logic. It was too dark, too dense, and its position was entirely inconsistent with the established light source. There was no object in the painting, no piece of furniture, no architectural feature that could possibly cast a shadow of that size and intensity in that specific spot. As digital imaging and advanced restoration techniques allowed for closer, more detailed examination, the unease surrounding this unexplained element grew. Art historians, accustomed to dissecting every detail of a painting for clues about its provenance, its artist, and its subject, found themselves stumped. The shadow had no logical origin within the painted reality. It seemed to exist independently, an anachronism within the composition. Its edges were soft, almost blurry, yet its presence was undeniably solid, a patch of inky blackness that absorbed light rather than merely reflecting its absence. It was as if a piece of true darkness had been transposed onto a canvas bathed in artificial light. The more experts studied it, the more unsettling it became. The shadow wasn't merely out of place, it was impossible. It ignored the laws of physics as depicted in the rest of the painting. It felt wrong. It was a silent, visual discord that, once noticed, could not be unseen. It didn't just sit there, it seemed to linger, a deep, unsettling blot against the otherwise harmonious scene. Some even reported feeling a strange chill when examining that particular corner of the painting for extended periods. A sensation that was, of course, dismissed as mere suggestion or imagination. Yet, the persistent feeling of something being profoundly amiss continued to plague those who delved into its mystery. And that, ultimately, is the central question that has haunted the portrait of a young woman for over a century. This shadow shouldn't be there. It violates every rule of light and perspective within the painting's own universe. And what it suggests, well, that's where things get really unsettling. Eleanor Vance, the young woman immortalized in the perplexing portrait, was born in 1875 in the quaint, unassuming town of Blackwood, Massachusetts. Her childhood was marked by a quiet grace, reflecting the modest yet respectable standing of her family. Her father, a meticulous clockmaker, spent his days surrounded by the intricate gears and springs of timepieces, instilling in Eleanor a subtle appreciation for precision and the hidden mechanisms of the world. Her mother, a skilled seamstress, wove threads into beautiful garments, teaching Eleanor the value of patience and the art of creation. Eleanor herself possessed an artistic sensibility, often sketching the natural beauty of Blackwood's surrounding forests and the quiet dignity of its townsfolk. She was known for her gentle demeanor, her thoughtful eyes, and a quiet energy that, while not overtly boisterous, drew people to her. In the spring of 1896, a traveling portrait artist named Thomas Albright arrived in Blackwood. Albright was a figure of moderate renown, known for his strikingly realistic portraits that captured not just the likeness, but seemingly the very essence of his subjects. He carried with him an aura of reclusiveness, a certain intensity that set him apart from the jovial traveling salesmen and performers who occasionally passed through town. His reputation preceded him, a whisper of a man deeply devoted to his craft, almost to the exclusion of all else. He was a master of shadow and light, capable of imbuing his canvases with a startling sense of depth and presence. The Vance family, like many others in Blackwood, had heard tales of Albright's talent. Proud of Eleanor's blossoming beauty and wishing to commemorate her coming of age, they made the significant financial sacrifice to commission him for a portrait. It was an investment, not just in art, but in a lasting legacy, a tangible representation of their daughter's grace. Albright, after viewing Eleanor and perhaps sensing the quiet depth within her, agreed to take on the commission, setting up a temporary studio in a rented room above the town's general store. The sittings began shortly thereafter, a series of long, quiet afternoons under Albright's intense gaze. Initially, Eleanor found the artist to be charming in his own peculiar way. He spoke little, but his eyes, sharp and discerning, seemed to absorb every detail of her being. He would occasionally offer a soft-spoken compliment or a gentle instruction, his voice low and almost hypnotic. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, Eleanor began to notice a shift, a growing discomfort that settled upon her during these sessions. Albright's focus became almost unnerving. He would stare not just at her, but seemingly through her, as if attempting to perceive something beyond her physical form. There was also a strange coldness in the studio, even on days when the sun streamed warmly through the window. Eleanor would often shiver, pulling her shawl tighter around her, attributing it to the draftiness of the old building. But the chill felt deeper, more pervasive, as if emanating from within the very air of the room. She also reported a peculiar sensation of being watched, even when Albright's back was turned, or when he stepped away from the easel to mix paints. It was a subtle, prickling feeling on the back of her neck, a constant unseen presence that made her skin crawl. She tried to dismiss it as the natural unease of being scrutinized for an extended period, an artist's intense gaze perhaps manifesting as a phantom presence. But the feeling persisted, growing more pronounced with each sitting. One afternoon, during a particularly long and silent session, Eleanor observed Albright briefly stop painting. His hand, usually so steady, faltered, and his intense gaze shifted from her to a specific corner of the room, the lower left, where the wall met the floor. He stared intently, his brow furrowed, a flicker of something unreadable, perhaps curiosity, perhaps concern, crossing his features. He held that gaze for several long seconds, his brush suspended in mid-air. Then, with a brusque shake of his head, he dismissed it with a quiet murmur. Just a trick of the light. He returned to his canvas, his movements a little more hurried, his intensity a little more strained. Eleanor, though mildly curious, thought nothing more of it at the time. It was a fleeting moment, easily forgotten amidst the monotony of posing. Yet in retrospect, this seemingly insignificant detail would become profoundly significant, for it was in that very corner, in the precise spot Albright had momentarily fixed his gaze, that the impossible shadow would later manifest in the finished portrait. He had seen something, or sensed something, an anomaly that his artistic eye, attuned to the subtleties of perception, had picked up, even if his conscious mind had quickly rationalized it away. He had dismissed it as an optical illusion, but perhaps in that brief instant, he had inadvertently acknowledged a presence that would soon become inextricably linked to his masterpiece and to Eleanor's fate. The final brushstrokes were applied, and the portrait of Eleanor Vance was declared complete. A collective sigh of relief, tinged with admiration, swept through the Vance household. When Albright unveiled his work in their parlor, every member of the family agreed it was a beautiful likeness, capturing Eleanor's quiet dignity and serene beauty with uncanny precision. The colors were vibrant, the textures rich, and Eleanor herself, gazing at the canvas, felt a strange mix of pride and an enduring, inexplicable unease. The painting was carefully hung in a prominent position in the parlor, a source of family pride and a testament to Eleanor's grace. However, the completion of the portrait did not bring the expected sense of closure for Eleanor. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new, more insidious chapter. Almost immediately after the painting took its place on the wall, Eleanor began experiencing unsettling phenomena. A persistent chill, far more profound than any draft, seemed to cling to her room, especially in the evenings when she would retire. It was a cold that seeped into her bones, a feeling of an unnatural drop in temperature that no amount of blankets or roaring fires could dispel. She found herself shivering even on mild nights, her breath sometimes misting in the air, a phenomenon she couldn't rationalize. Then came the whispers, faint ethereal sounds, just at the edge of audibility, like dry leaves rustling or distant voices murmuring secrets. They were never clear enough to decipher, always just beyond her grasp, yet undeniably present. They seemed to emanate from the parlor, from the very room where the portrait hung, and would often intensify when she was alone in the house. A subtle, disquieting chorus that picked at the frayed edges of her nerves. She would strain to hear, convinced she was imagining things, yet the whispers persisted, a phantom melody of unease. More disturbingly, Eleanor developed a pervasive sense of being constantly observed. It wasn't the fleeting feeling she'd experienced in Albright's studio. This was a heavy, unwavering gaze, a palpable presence that followed her movements, even when she was entirely alone in her private chambers. She would glance over her shoulder, convinced she'd catch a glimpse of something, only to find empty air. The feeling was so strong, so suffocating, that it began to erode her peace of mind. Sleep, once a refuge, became a battle. She frequently woke in the mornings feeling utterly drained, as if her very energy had been siphoned away during the night. Her limbs felt heavy, her mind foggy, and a profound weariness settled deep within her, far beyond the typical fatigue of a young woman. It was a sensation of being depleted, as if something unseen was drawing sustenance from her very essence. Eleanor, a sensible and practical young woman, tried desperately to rationalize these experiences. She attributed the chill to the old house, the whispers to the wind, and the feeling of being watched to an overactive imagination, a lingering effect of the intense scrutiny she had endured during her sittings. She confided in her family, subtly at first, mentioning her fatigue and the strange cold. Her parents, loving but pragmatic, dismissed her concerns with well-meaning advice. "You're just tired, dear," her mother would say. "Perhaps you've been reading too many of those Gothic novels." Her father, ever the clockmaker, would suggest she needed more fresh air or a change of routine. They attributed her feelings to nerves, to the natural anxieties of a young woman on the cusp of adulthood, or simply an overactive imagination. Their dismissals, though intended to soothe, only isolated Eleanor further in her growing terror. As weeks turned into months, a new, more insidious phenomenon began to manifest, one that Eleanor initially struggled to believe even her own eyes. She started noticing tiny, almost imperceptible shifts in the painting itself. The light on the canvas seemed to change ever so slightly, or the shadow of a depicted curtain appeared to deepen, or perhaps a fold in her painted dress seemed to shift. These changes were never dramatic, never overt enough to be undeniable to anyone else. They were subtle, fleeting alterations, occurring only when she was alone in the parlor, or when she would catch a glimpse of the portrait in her peripheral vision. She would blink, look again, and the painting would appear perfectly normal, exactly as she remembered it. She dismissed these as tricks of the light, visual fatigue, or simply her imagination playing cruel games on her increasingly stressed mind. She was convinced she was losing her grip on reality, that her own perceptions were betraying her. But then came the evening that shattered her fragile self-deception. It was a particularly dark and stormy night, the wind howling outside, rattling the windows of the Vance home. Eleanor found herself alone in the parlor, drawn by an inexplicable compulsion to gaze at her own painted likeness. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across the room, but it was not these ordinary shadows that caught her eye. In the lower left corner of the portrait, in the exact spot where Albright had once stared, Eleanor swore she saw a faint, dark shape. It wasn't just a deeper shadow. It was a distinct amorphous form, a blot of pure darkness that seemed to rise from the canvas itself. It was there for only a moment, a fleeting, terrifying apparition, before it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, melting back into the painted background. Eleanor gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. Her blood ran cold, and a primal scream caught in her lungs. She stumbled backward, knocking over a small side table, the clatter echoing loudly in the sudden silence. Her mind reeled, struggling to reconcile what she had just witnessed with the rational world she knew. This was no trick of the light, no figment of her imagination. This was real. She had seen it. The faint, dark shape, the impossible shadow had momentarily manifested, undeniable and terrifying. She frantically tried to convince her family. Her parents, roused by the commotion, found her pale and trembling, her eyes wide with terror. She stammered out her account, describing the moving shadow, the sudden oppressive presence. But they could see nothing amiss with the portrait, which now appeared perfectly normal, serene, and utterly still. They attributed her distress to the storm, to her declining health, to a feverish dream. They gently led her back to her room, urging her to rest, convinced she was merely unwell and overwrought. Their disbelief, though born of concern, left Eleanor feeling utterly isolated and profoundly alone. She knew what she had seen. She knew something was terribly wrong with the painting, and with her. The impossible shadow, once a mere aesthetic anomaly, was now a living, breathing terror, a silent sentinel that seemed to be growing, feeding, and slowly, inexorably claiming her. Eleanor's health continued its alarming decline. The vibrant young woman who had once graced Blackwood with her quiet energy now moved like a ghost within her own home. Her complexion, once fair, had become alarmingly pale, almost translucent, and dark circles perpetually shadowed her eyes. She grew increasingly withdrawn, her once thoughtful gaze now distant and haunted. The constant fatigue had morphed into a profound exhaustion that seemed to permeate her very being, leaving her breathless after even the simplest tasks. Doctors, perplexed by her symptoms, could find no physical cause for her ailments. They examined her thoroughly, listened to her heart and lungs, checked her blood, but every test returned normal. They prescribed tonics and rest, suggesting that perhaps she was suffering from a nervous disposition, or the vapors, common diagnoses for women whose illnesses defied medical understanding in that era. Her family, initially dismissive, now found themselves consumed by a gnawing worry. Eleanor, their beloved daughter, was wasting away before their very eyes, a shadow of her former self. They tried every remedy known to them, from herbal concoctions prepared by local healers to expensive elixirs brought from the city. But nothing seemed to stem the tide of her mysterious illness. Her mother spent countless hours by her bedside, stroking her feverish brow while her father paced the floors, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a deep, troubled frown. The once proud portrait in the parlor now seemed to mock them, a stark reminder of the healthy, vibrant girl Eleanor once was. Eleanor herself had come to a terrifying conclusion. Her worsening condition was directly linked to the portrait. She felt it was draining her, siphoning off her life force with every passing day. The feeling of being watched was now constant, an oppressive weight that never lifted. Even when she was in her own bed, far from the parlor, she tried to escape its gaze, resorting to desperate measures. She would turn the painting to face the wall or drape a heavy cloth over it, but the chilling sensation of being observed persisted, a phantom presence that defied physical barriers. It was as if the portrait, even when hidden, continued to exert its malevolent influence, its presence seeping through the very walls of the house. Unbeknownst to the family, who were too consumed by Eleanor's visible suffering to scrutinize the painting, the shadow within the portrait was steadily becoming more distinct. What had once been a fleeting, amorphous smudge now possessed a more defined, albeit still unsettlingly vague form. It was still faint enough for an unsuspecting eye to dismiss as a trick of the light, a flaw in the canvas, or a product of an overactive imagination, but to those who knew its history, its presence was undeniable. It was a deepening blot of darkness, subtly shifting, hinting at an unseen entity lurking just beneath the painted surface, a silent testament to the malevolent force that was slowly consuming Eleanor. Driven to the brink of despair, and with her health deteriorating rapidly, Eleanor knew she had to take a drastic step. She had to confront the source of her torment, the man who had brought this curse into her life. Thomas Albright, the enigmatic artist, had long since left Blackwood, but Eleanor had heard whispers that he was still in the region, working on commissions in a neighboring town. Gathering what little strength she had left, and against her family's fervent protests, Eleanor arranged for a carriage to take her to find him. She found Albright in a dimly lit studio, his appearance startlingly changed. He was gaunt, his face deeply lined, and his intense eyes, once so discerning, now held a haunted, distant look. He looked as if he too had been drained, aged beyond his years, a pale reflection of the man she remembered. He was startled by her unexpected appearance, his initial reaction a mix of annoyance and apprehension. Eleanor, her voice weak but firm, recounted her harrowing experiences. The chill, the whispers, the constant feeling of being watched, and her rapidly failing health. She described the shadow in the painting, how it seemed to grow and shift, and finally, she directly confronted him, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and accusation. "Mr. Albright, did you put anything unusual into that painting?" Albright initially tried to dismiss her, his voice a low, raspy murmur. He spoke of artistic interpretation, of capturing the nuances of light and shadow, and tried to convince her that her imagination was simply running wild. But Eleanor pressed him, her desperation lending her a fierce resolve. She described the specific corner, the exact spot where he had once paused during their sittings, where the shadow now undeniably resided. As she spoke, a visible tremor ran through Albright's emaciated frame. His eyes, fixed on some unseen point beyond Eleanor, widened with a dawning horror. The dismissive artist dissolved, replaced by a man consumed by his own terrifying realization. He became agitated, his composure cracking under the weight of her words. His voice, now barely a whisper, was laced with a chilling mixture of fear and profound regret. He confessed, not to having intentionally painted a malevolent entity, but to having felt a presence in his studio during Eleanor's sittings. He described it as an old darkness, a lingering, unseen force that seemed drawn to Eleanor's quiet, artistic energy. He admitted that he had initially perceived it as a unique artistic challenge, an opportunity to capture something truly ethereal, something beyond the ordinary. He had indeed tried to capture it, to contain it within the canvas, believing he could bind it, control it, and transmute it into art. He had painted the shadow, not as a mere aesthetic detail, but as an attempt to give form to the unseen, to visually represent the anomaly he had sensed. His confession sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine, far colder than any she had felt in her room. He spoke of his arrogance, his belief that his artistic skill could master such a force. He had thought he was merely painting an unusual shadow, a subtle hint of the mysterious. But now, hearing Eleanor's story, he knew he had made a terrible, grave mistake. "I think I trapped it," he whispered, his voice cracking, his eyes wide with a terror that mirrored her own. Or maybe, it trapped me. The implication hung heavy in the air, a terrifying realization that the artist, in his quest for artistic mastery, had become an unwitting conduit, a pawn in a game far older and more sinister than he could have ever imagined. He had painted a prison, but it seemed the prisoner was now exerting its will, and Eleanor was its unfortunate victim. Albright's confession, a chilling whisper of artistic hubris and unintended consequence, was far from a comfort to Eleanor. Instead, it solidified her deepest fears, giving a terrifying name to the unseen force that had been slowly consuming her. He warned her, his voice hoarse with a newfound urgency, that the shadow he had painted was not merely an aesthetic detail, nor a simple trick of light and pigment. He believed it was a manifestation of an entity, a spirit of lingering, an ancient presence that had been drawn to Eleanor's unique, quiet energy during her sittings. His eyes, now filled with a profound despair, locked onto hers. He declared, with a conviction that brooked no doubt, that this entity was now actively feeding on her life force, slowly draining her vitality, much like a parasite. He reiterated with agonizing regret that he had made a terrible, unforgivable mistake, an error of judgment that had unleashed a horror he could neither comprehend nor control. He had sought to capture beauty, but had instead ensnared a beast. Eleanor, armed with this terrifying truth, returned home, her body weak but her resolve hardened. She tried to convey Albright's confession to her family, to explain the true nature of the shadow in the portrait, the malevolent entity that was slowly killing her. She spoke of Albright's haunted eyes, his gaunt appearance, and his chilling admission. But her family, still clinging to their rational explanations, dismissed her words as the ravings of a delirious mind. They saw Albright as a madman, his confession merely proof of his mental instability, and Eleanor as a victim of her own deteriorating health. Imagining things in her fevered state, they refused to believe such an outlandish tale, a story that defied all logic and reason. The painting to them remained a beloved family heirloom, a beautiful if now somewhat cursed depiction of their ailing daughter. They adamantly refused to remove it from its place of honor, let alone destroy it, convinced it was merely a painting, incapable of such malice. The family's disbelief, however well-intentioned, pushed Eleanor to the brink. She knew with chilling certainty that her life was ebbing away, and that the painting was the undeniable cause. In a moment of terror-fueled clarity, driven by a desperate need for self-preservation, Eleanor decided she had to act. She would destroy the painting herself. One moonless night, when the rest of the household was deep in slumber, Eleanor crept downstairs, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She moved with a stealth born of desperation, her eyes fixed on the portrait hanging innocently in the parlor. As she reached for the frame, her trembling fingers brushing against the cold, lacquered wood, an impossible thing happened. The shadow within the painting, the dark, amorphous shape she had seen manifest before, briefly and undeniably, moved. It wasn't a trick of light or a flicker of her strained vision. It shifted, visibly darkening, expanding as if drawing breath. Then, to her horror, it seemed to reach out from the canvas, a tendril of inky blackness stretching towards her, a silent, predatory gesture. Simultaneously, the room plunged into an unnatural, bone-chilling cold, far more intense than any she had previously experienced. It was a cold that seemed to suck the very warmth from her body, a sudden, crushing weight of oppressive energy that enveloped her completely. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence, and a faint guttural hum seemed to resonate from the painting itself, a sound that vibrated deep within her bones. Overwhelmed by the sudden, terrifying manifestation, by the sheer malevolence emanating from the canvas, and the profound, instantaneous drain of her remaining energy, Eleanor gasped, a choked cry escaping her lips. Her vision swam, the room spun, and her legs gave way beneath her. She collapsed to the floor, her body hitting the polished wood with a dull thud. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the deepening, swirling shadow in the portrait, its silent hunger now fully revealed. She was found unconscious the next morning by her mother, who upon entering the parlor let out a piercing shriek. Eleanor lay sprawled on the floor, barely clinging to life, her skin ashen, her breathing shallow and ragged. Her mother, frantic with terror, immediately summoned the rest of the family and their physician. As they rushed to Eleanor's side, their eyes inevitably fell upon the painting, and this time, they saw it, the shadow. It was no longer faint, no longer easily dismissed as a trick of the eye or a flaw in the canvas. It was undeniably clear, a dark, amorphous shape that pulsed with an almost tangible malevolence. It seemed to emanate an oppressive aura, a palpable sense of dread that filled the room, chilling them to the core. It was a blot of pure, inky blackness, swirling and shifting within the painted background, a stark contrast to the serene depiction of Eleanor. Its form was still indistinct, yet its presence was undeniable, radiating a cold, palpable sense of evil. They could no longer rationalize it away, no longer dismiss it as Eleanor's imagination or Albright's madness. The undeniable clarity of the shadow, coupled with Eleanor's near-fatal collapse, forced them to confront a terrifying truth. Something utterly unnatural, something profoundly evil, was bound within that canvas, and it was actively destroying their daughter. The painting, once a source of pride, was now a horrifying testament to an inexplicable terror. Their disbelief shattered, replaced by a dawning, agonizing fear for Eleanor's life. Terrified and desperate to save Eleanor, her family, their rational minds reeling from the horrifying manifestation they had witnessed, realized that conventional medicine was utterly useless against such an unimaginable threat. Their beloved daughter was fading, and the monster in the painting was undeniably real. They cast aside their skepticism and began a frantic search for help beyond the realm of doctors and tonics. They consulted local folklore experts, hushed voices in dimly lit parlors, seeking wisdom from old wives' tales and forgotten legends. They spoke with spiritualists, individuals who claimed to commune with the unseen, their eyes wide with a desperate hope. They even approached a reclusive former priest, Father Michael, known in hushed whispers for his quiet battles with unexplained phenomena in the darker corners of the region. It was Mary Beth Thorne, a spiritualist from a neighboring town, who finally answered their desperate plea. A woman of formidable presence, with piercing, intelligent eyes and an aura of quiet authority, she arrived at the Vance home with a small, worn leather satchel. The moment she stepped into the parlor, her gaze fell upon the portrait, and a shiver visibly ran down her spine. "There is a malevolent presence here," she declared, her voice low and firm, "and it emanates directly from that canvas. It is not merely a spirit. It is something ancient, something that hungers." She sensed the oppressive aura, the unnatural cold that still lingered in the room, and the palpable despair clinging to Eleanor. Without hesitation, Mary Beth prepared for a cleansing ritual around the portrait, arranging candles, herbs, and small symbolic objects on a makeshift altar before the painting. As Mary Beth began her incantations, her voice rising and falling in an ancient rhythmic chant, the room reacted with terrifying violence. The shadow within the painting, as if provoked, darkened intensely, swirling and expanding until it seemed to consume half the canvas. The air grew heavy, thick with an almost suffocating pressure. Objects in the room, seemingly of their own accord, were violently thrown across the parlor. A heavy porcelain vase, sitting innocently on a nearby table, shattered against the wall. A small ornate clock toppled from the mantelpiece, its chimes silenced with a jarring clang. The temperature in the room plummeted dramatically, the air growing so cold that their breaths plumed visibly. And then a guttural whisper, ancient and chilling, was heard by everyone present, a sound that seemed to emanate directly from the canvas, a low, malevolent snarl filled with defiance and fury. It was a sound that froze the blood in their veins, a clear, undeniable declaration of the entity's presence and power. Despite the chaos and the palpable terror, Marybeth Thorne remained unyielding, her focus unwavering. She observed the shadow's violent resistance, its furious reaction to her attempts to banish it, and a grim realization dawned upon her. This was no ordinary haunting, no simple lost soul. This shadow isn't just a simple spirit, she stated, her voice strained but resolute amidst the turmoil. It's something older, something deeply entrenched in the canvas itself. She explained that Albright, in his misguided artistic ambition, hadn't merely painted a shadow. He had, in fact, bound an ancient, malevolent entity within the physical confines of the canvas. He had created a prison, yes, but a prison that now allowed the entity to feed, to draw sustenance from the living. It is trying to escape, Marybeth grimly warned, and it is using Eleanor's life force as its key. The spiritualist then delivered the horrifying truth, the only viable path forward. Her face was etched with sorrow, her voice heavy with the weight of her discovery. The only way to save Eleanor is to destroy the painting, she declared, her gaze sweeping across the terrified faces of the Vance family. But not just burn it. You must utterly obliterate it, leave no trace, and then the remains must be cleansed, purified, lest the lingering essence of this darkness find another host. She emphasized the complete destruction, the need to eradicate every fiber of the canvas, every speck of paint that held the entity captive. The family was aghast. The thought of destroying the portrait, a piece of their family history, a representation of their beautiful daughter, was painful beyond measure. It went against every instinct they possessed, every ingrained respect for heirlooms and art. But as they looked from the malevolent, pulsating shadow in the painting to the pale, lifeless form of Eleanor, barely clinging to existence, the difficult decision became agonizingly clear. Their daughter's life, her very soul, was infinitely more important than any painting, no matter how cherished or cursed. With Eleanor fading fast, her breath growing shallower by the hour, her family reluctantly, tearfully agreed. They would destroy the painting, and with it, the terror that had descended upon their home. The grim determination settled over them, a desperate resolve born from love and fear, ready to face the unknown with fire and faith. The family, guided by Marybeth Thorne's unwavering resolve, prepared for the grim task. With the spiritualist leading the way, they carefully, almost reverently, lifted the painting from its cursed spot on the parlor wall. The weight of it seemed immense, not just from the canvas and frame, but from the palpable malevolence it contained. They carried it out into the cool night air, away from the house, towards a secluded clearing at the edge of their property, where a ritualistic fire had been meticulously prepared. Dry kindling and logs were stacked high, waiting to consume the source of their terror. As they approached the pyre, the shadow within the portrait seemed to writhe, a silent internal struggle visible to their now attuned eyes. Marybeth instructed them to place the painting carefully atop the kindling. A hush fell over the small group as the first flickering flame touched the canvas. And then, it happened. As the fire began to consume the oil and linen, a sound, unlike anything they had ever heard, rent the night air. It was a scream, but not a physical sound that vibrated the eardrums. It was a chilling, non-physical shriek that seemed to tear at the very fabric of their minds, vibrating deep within their souls. It was a sound of pure agony and furious defiance, a desperate wail from the entity as its binding prison began to unravel. The flames, fueled by an unseen force, roared higher, consuming the portrait with terrifying speed. The shadow, once so potent and menacing, thrashed wildly within the inferno, its form contorting in a final, desperate struggle before dissolving into nothingness, leaving behind only the acrid smell of burning paint and the faint scent of ozone. Inside the Vance home, Eleanor lay still in her bed, her breathing shallow, her life force barely a flicker. Suddenly, as the scream of the shadow faded into the night, she gasped. Her eyes, which had been dull and lifeless, fluttered open. A deep breath filled her lungs, and she slowly, weakly, sat up. Her skin, which had been ashen and cold, began to regain a healthy pink hue. The oppressive feeling that had clung to her for weeks, the constant drain on her energy, vanished as if a heavy cloak had been lifted. She felt weak, profoundly exhausted, but undeniably alive. A faint, almost imperceptible warmth spread through her body, replacing the icy chill that had permeated her very bones. Hope, a feeling long forgotten, surged within her. After the last embers of the fire died down, Mary Beth Thorne meticulously collected the ashes of the painting. Not a single flake was left behind. Following her precise instructions, the family then buried the ashes deep within the consecrated ground of the church cemetery, a final act of purification and containment. As the last shovelful of earth covered the remains, the lingering feeling of dread that had permeated the Vance home finally lifted. A fragile peace, tentative but real, settled over the household. The air felt lighter, the shadows less menacing. It was as if a great weight had been removed, not just from their shoulders, but from the very essence of their lives. In the weeks that followed, news reached Blackwood, carried by whispers and solemn tones, that Thomas Albright, the enigmatic artist, had been found dead in his studio. His body was a shocking sight, withered and aged far beyond his years, his skin like parchment, his eyes sunken and hollow. It was as if something had drained the very life from him, leaving behind only an empty husk. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, but those who knew of Eleanor's ordeal, and those who had seen Albright's haunted appearance before his demise, harbored a different, darker suspicion. He had been working on another portrait, left unfinished on his easel, its canvas bearing the faint, disturbing outline of a similar shadow in the corner. It was a chilling testament to his continued, perilous experimentation, a grim warning of the dangers he courted. The shadow in Eleanor's portrait, and the subsequent events, were never fully explained by science. Indeed, how could they be? The shadow was never truly seen by scientific instruments in its full, active, malevolent form. It was a phenomenon that defied empirical measurement, a manifestation that existed on a plane beyond conventional understanding. Only those who had experienced its chilling effects, who had witnessed its impossible movements and felt its oppressive drain, truly understood its nature. The science can't explain part referred not to a lack of effort, but to the inherent impossibility of a painted shadow, moving, screaming, or causing physical effects like draining a person's life force. It was a truth that existed outside the boundaries of logic and reason, a testament to forces unknown and unseen. The Vance family, profoundly scarred by their ordeal, never spoke publicly about the incident. The fear of ridicule, of being labeled insane, was a powerful deterrent. They lived quiet lives, forever marked by the terror they had faced, always remembering the portrait and the terrible price it had almost exacted. The memory of the screaming shadow, the withered artist, and Eleanor's near-death experience became a closely guarded family secret, whispered only among trusted kin, a chilling reminder of the thin veil between their world and another. They understood, in a way that others could not, that some truths were too profound, too terrifying, to be easily shared or understood by a world that preferred its mysteries neatly solved and its horrors safely confined to fiction. Eleanor Vance, having been snatched from the precipice of death, recovered fully from her ordeal. The pallor that had haunted her face for months slowly gave way to a healthy glow, and the spark returned to her eyes. She lived a long, healthy life, far exceeding the expectations of those who had witnessed her near demise. The experience, however, left an indelible mark. She never picked up a paintbrush again, the memory of the cursed portrait too vivid, too terrifying to ever associate with art. Instead, she developed a profound appreciation for the simple, tangible joys of existence, the warmth of sunlight on her skin, the laughter of children, the quiet rhythm of daily life. These were the things she clung to, the anchors that kept her firmly rooted in the world of the living, far from the cold, unseen forces that had almost claimed her. In her later years, when her grandchildren gathered around her, their eyes wide with wonder, she would occasionally speak of the cold shadow. Her voice would drop to a hushed, almost reverent tone, and her gaze would grow distant, as if reliving a memory too chilling to fully articulate. She would recount the tale of the painting, the artist, and the malevolent presence, treating it as a chilling family legend. A cautionary tale passed down through generations. The details would often be softened, the true horror subtly veiled, but the core message remained. Some darkness exists beyond our understanding, and some art comes with a terrible, hidden price. To her grandchildren, it was a thrilling, spooky story. But to Eleanor, it was a profound truth, a scar on her soul that had healed but never truly vanished. The story of the strange portrait and the artist who painted it, though officially unspoken by the Vance family, gradually seeped into the local folklore of Blackwood. Passed down through hushed whispers in taverns and around hearths, the legend of the Blackwood Shadow grew. Details often got exaggerated, distorted, or embellished with each retelling, as is the nature of oral tradition. The artist, Thomas Albright, became a figure of dark mystery, a sorcerer of the brush who dabbled in forbidden arts. Eleanor, the innocent victim, transformed into a heroine who narrowly escaped a supernatural evil. The painting itself became a spectral entity, appearing and disappearing in local tales, always bringing misfortune to those who dared to gaze upon it. It was a story told to frighten children, a warning against meddling with forces unknown, a thrilling local myth that blended fact with the terrifying fictions of human imagination. Even with the painting utterly destroyed, its ashes buried in consecrated ground, the central question lingered, a persistent echo in the minds of those who knew the true story. What was that shadow? Was it merely a malevolent entity that Albright had accidentally trapped? A spirit of lingering darkness drawn to Eleanor's quiet energy and inadvertently bound to the canvas by the artist's intense focus? Or was it something far more sinister, something he had deliberately conjured, a dark muse he sought to control only to find himself consumed by its power? The withered husk of his body, the half-finished portrait with its nascent shadow, suggested a man who had walked too close to the abyss, perhaps even invited it in, believing he could master what was inherently untamable. The truth remained elusive, a terrifying blank canvas in the annals of the supernatural, allowing for endless speculation and chilling possibilities. The portrait of a young woman might be gone, reduced to ash and buried in hallowed ground, its physical form eradicated from existence. But the impossible shadow it contained, the malevolent presence that defied logic and reason, served as a chilling, enduring reminder. It was a stark testament that some darkness exists beyond our understanding, beyond the comfortable boundaries of science and conventional thought. It was a force that waited, patiently, for an unwitting artist to give it form, for an innocent subject to provide it with sustenance, for a canvas to become its prison and its portal. It was a reminder that the world holds mysteries that cannot be explained away, horrors that cannot be easily dismissed, and that sometimes the most ordinary objects can become vessels for the most extraordinary and terrifying evils. And so the tale of Eleanor Vance and the cursed portrait concludes, yet the questions it raises continue to haunt. In a world increasingly reliant on scientific explanation, this story stands as a testament to the enduring power of the unknown. It invites us to ponder the boundaries of our reality, to consider that perhaps, just perhaps, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy. Have you ever encountered something that defied all logical explanation? A chilling experience, a strange object, or perhaps a piece of art that seemed to possess a life of its own? We thrive on these inexplicable tales. Share your own stories of unexplained phenomena or strange art in the comments below. Let us know if you believe in the power of objects to hold spirits, or if you think there's always a rational explanation, no matter how bizarre the circumstances. Your experiences add to the tapestry of human understanding, or perhaps misunderstanding, of the mysterious forces that may lie just beyond our perception. We're eager to hear your thoughts and delve deeper into the shadows of the unexplained.